Carlos Ramirez, owner of NVS Audio in Roselle, New Jersey. We have a huge wiring rescue mess on this 2020 Road Glide. Bunch of stuff I don't understand. There's a backstory to this bike. I've been talking back and forth with the client, gave him advice on which route to go, what wiring, what equipment to use. He chose to try and do the install himself, which I'm fine with. Somewhere along the way, he ended up going to another shop, and it's a shop I'm friendly with too, so I'm surprised. And somehow, some way, this disaster took place. The shop is blaming him, he's blaming the shop. I don't know who did what, but it's not right. This bike is brand new, it's a 2020. We have different screws in the windshield. That's minor, no big deal. You know how I am about my power and ground wiring. Fuse block under the seat. I have no idea how they got the seat to go back on. What the heck is this? Some of the wiring he got from me, so it's oxygen-free copper. Some he did not, and it's copper-clad aluminum. That is aluminum wire right there. That is copper wire right there. So then I see some major mistakes. So it's bad enough that that's aluminum wire and it goes to the positive terminal, but that's 1 4-gauge aluminum, which after the resistance and the voltage loss becomes 8-gauge, and then it splits into 2 4-gauge, and then it splits again into 1, 2, 3, 4 4-gauge. So you have, we'll call that an 8-gauge because it's aluminum, not copper. That becomes 1, 2, 3, 4 4-gauge. That math doesn't work. Huge voltage drops, not good. Then where it gets really bad is the disaster inside the bed. Giant hole. I'm not sure if that was supposed to be for a tweeter or just an oversized wire to run the wires. The wire hole should be on the bottom, not the top. The ring is mounted solid, but why white putty? Why not black silicone, black panel bond, black epoxy? That looks terrible. You know how I hate putting amplifiers in the saddlebag. I would have preferred the amplifier in the tour pack, and I would have made a bracket to stand it up right here so everything in the tour pack still fits. And it's held on by Velcro, so that's gonna fall. Then on the woofer, I have not pulled this apart yet, but I know this expensive Beam of Power IX is destroyed. These appear to be 3/8 bolts that run through the woofer. So I hate to see what it looks like on the other side. So I'm sure the hole in the woofer has been enlarged, hitting the surround and damaging the woofer to put a nut to hold this woofer in. I don't know what that's about or why they did that. Then the wiring. We have 14-gauge, what appears to be aluminum wiring, ran to the woofer, which would be fine. But then they jumped it to another 14-gauge going to the amp. So that means the woofer on the other side is jumped to the woofer on this side, and then both woofers are running off 1 14-gauge wire. So that means each woofer is getting 28-gauge, which isn't enough current for a 3K to run these woofers properly. So I could have lived past it if they ran this wire all the way to the amp, this wire all the way to the amp. That way each woofer would get a 14-gauge. Since they jumped this wire into this wire, both woofers are running off 1 cheap 14-gauge wire. So if they're lucky, each woofer is getting 28-gauge. Then on top of that, I'm pretty sure that's aluminum wire, so it's even worse. It's made by Install Gear, and Install Gear is available on Amazon Actually, no, it's Gear It, which I've never even heard of. So, nowhere on the cable does it say oxygen-free copper. We're gonna have to look it up. I'm assuming it's not, but even if it is, 28 gauge for the woofer does not work. You can only imagine what I'm gonna find under the fairing and at the battery. Oh my God, it's so hard. It's easier to do it the right way. I don't even know how I'm gonna fix that. Oh my goodness. I didn't even realize there was an amp in this bag too. Scratches all over the bike. This isn't a scratch, they gouged the heck out of the fairing. So that fairing's gonna have to be repainted. Owner's blaming the installer, installer's blaming the owner. These are the screws that come with the diamond horns. We don't use those because of this reason. This build's only a couple weeks old and the screws are rusted to hell. So those can be difficult to remove, plus it looks terrible. On top of that, they use decking screws to mount the speaker. So now the screw head is way too big and cracked the grill. And then my issue is, even when I replace it with the proper screws, it bored out the holes in the fairing too big. So once I use a smaller screw, it's not gonna sit in that hole. So I don't know how I'm gonna fix that. Couldn't remove the tweeter because they didn't put a quick disconnect on it like we do. So now I have to cut the wires. And we always solder the terminal, and we don't use the terminal that came with the speaker, because see how that wire sticks out? It has damaged the brand new Bema woofer. See that? And it's the same on both sides. So we don't use the quick disconnect that comes with the speaker because it makes the wire stick out like that. And now you have a large piece of metal protruding because this tweeter sits really close to the woofer and it's smacking the woofer. On top of that, it didn't stand a chance because the tweeter's supposed to be over here. If you install the tweeter over there, the tweeter will actually clear and give the woofer room. But if you look through the top, you could see how the tweeter is hitting the woofer. It's physically touching the woofer. Now, if you move the tweeter over there, it gives you another ½ inch of space because the fairing is tapered. So there's less space on that side, more space on that side. The reason they installed the tweeter here is that's where the factory tweeter bump out is. We have hog tuned grills in stock that we use that give us a flat surface, and then we mount the tweeter there. So this is done completely wrong and has to be redone. Both woofers are damaged. That one's got a groove cut into it right there. It's got to create a horrible buzzing sound while the speaker's playing. So exactly what I expected to find under the fairing. Rat's nest of wiring. The headlight bolts aren't even tight. Either one. Both loose. The amps are not bolted down. They're not even straight. And the customer is complaining that his headlight is aiming down. And that's because the Lex rack is not cut properly and it's hitting the top of the amplifier right there and gouging the amplifier. See there where it's coming in contact with the amp? That corner is supposed to be ground completely flat. The rack's supposed to come close, but it's not supposed to touch the amplifier. So being that there's too much material left on the rack, it's pushing down on the amp, which is pushing down on the headlight. It's a shame. All really good equipment installed all wrong. All right, let's take it apart and fix it. This is why it's super important to use fender covers. This was definitely not done from riding. That was definitely done during the install. That's why it's super important to use fender covers. We used the $50 fender covers from Harley or the $5 moving blankets from Harbor Freight. You double it up and it fits in there perfectly and protects the fender. These blankets right here. Wow, too lazy to remove the tether before applying the sound deadener, and then you can put the tether back over the sound deadener. There's literally sound deadener stuck over the tether covering the screw. That's the first time I've seen that. This is Ephraim's bike. We did this bike like 6 months ago. As you can see, stainless steel screws, so no rust on the screws, proper tweeter position, and no damage to the woofer behind it. The wires are soldered and folded flat, so you can see they don't stick out like on the other one. And there's no damage to the 6.5 at all. These are the grills we use from Hog Tunes. That's one that comes factory on the bike. That's why they put that tweeter there, because the dimple's already there. The proper positioning is here. So we give these back to the client, we use these grills, and we place the horn here. This is not the right way to do it.